Hello. I've been enjoying being part of Praying Together and listening to reflections and seeing colleagues across the country and hearing the amazing things that some people are doing in the name of the Primates Fund. As a child, I lived in a place called on West Hill, and that was on the east side of Toronto. And I now live and work in Nova Scotia, where I've served as a professor at Dalhousie University, a parish priest in a fishing village, and then later in an inner city parish, and then as bishop in the Diocese of Nova Scotia and PEI. As a child in Ontario, I knew nothing about Nova Scotia. I had done a social studies project at school on mining, and my dad had helped me to build a model mine with moving carts and things that went up and down, and I got to understand that there were coal mines in Canada. And I thought right then I didn't ever want to be in one because the thought of being that far underground was just scary. I didn't really know about Nova Scotia until something terrible happened there about 63 years ago. And on the evening of October 23rd, a bump, which is an underground earthquake, destroyed something called Number 2 Mine in a place called Spring Hill, Nova Scotia. And if I'm remembering correctly, Pam Oliver was living there because her father, the Reverend Greg Pritchard, was the rector of the parish. And as one report put it, that underground earthquake sent floors, ceilings, and walls to meet each other. It opened great chasms. It poured coal and debris into open spaces. It cut off communication below 7,800 feet. And in the immediate aftermath, the Museum of Industry put it this way: 81 men made their way to the surface, and then from the deeps, there was only silence. That Nova Scotia Museum of Industry website has a little description. Says Number 2 Mine was an old mine. There had been bumps before in Spring Hill, but this mine at 14,300 feet was believed to be the deepest mine in the world. And that scares the wits out of me. This depth, included with a 25-degree pitch, which meant everything was on a slope, made the mine prone to these small bumps. And although they were called small, they caused substantial movement of the earth and caused the whole mine in several sections to collapse and to toss the men and the machinery around. Upon the news of the bump, the media fled to Spring Hill. And for the first time ever, the CBC broadcast from the pit head of the mine. And they brought the unfolding drama into people's living rooms. All those who had televisions and radios could hear it live. And we so take that kind of news coverage for granted now that we just think that, of course, that's what would happen. But at that time, hearts and minds far and wide were caught up in the story, in its miracle rescues, in the deaths of many, and in the despair of the families in the local community. And out of that came all kinds of things, poetry and music, like the Ballad of Spring Hill by Peggy Seeger. But one thing that also came out of it was a concern for organized relief work. How can we do this faster and better? So you know where this is going, right? Our current website says, the tragedy moved Anglicans and other Canadians to respond with assistance for the stricken families. As a result of this experience, the church recognized a need for efficient process to channel assistance quickly in situations of emergency. And it took a year, but a year later, the Primates World Relief Fund was established. It seemed to me that what I remember following that was that about once a year in our little church, St. Margaret's in the Pines, we were asked to give money to this PWRF in case there was another disaster somewhere where people would need help. Now, about that point, I went off to university. And as a university student, I was a church dropout. So it wasn't until we had moved to Nova Scotia in 1974 and got ourselves settled that we reconnected with the church and learned that PWRF now had a D for development. And again, about once a year, we heard about this PWRDF and collected some funds for it. And it seemed to me that there were a lot of really good things going on, but I'd never heard about them. Now, over the years, God worked through people for different ones, and they all had a position called diocesan representative for PWRDF. And they were the ones who kept me connected to PWRDF. They called us for meetings. They sent mail. They showed me useful materials for my parish. They invited people who worked in Toronto to come to visit. And sometimes they even brought partners from other countries. And they put a face on development work in places that we could barely imagine. The staff at PWRDF in Toronto also kept me connected. I read their stories in the Anglican Church newspaper. I was fascinated by their reports of what they were doing all over the world. At national church meetings, I heard their passion for their work, for their partnerships with amazing people. And yet, a whole lot of people still did not seem to know what we were doing. And I remember at one point feeling really dreadful and guilty that I was living an easy life in Canada while partners were struggling. And I said that to one of the staff, and he looked at me and he said, "Well, do you support us financially?" And I said, "Of course I do." "Well, that's your contribution." I remember the finger pointing right at me. And he said, "I'm single, I can travel to Africa, I can work with our partners, but I can't do that if there's no money. So you do your part and I'll do mine." So I've continued to give regularly to the Primates Fund because I know it's money well spent. The 50th anniversary of the Spring Hill mine disaster came by, and the chosen reading for the memorial event was that one that Pam read earlier. It's the reading from All Souls Day, and it's a message of hope. And at the point at which the memorial event began, all the miners, just dressed like they were in that video, they had their headlamp turned off and it was dark. And as they read each man's name who had died, they turned the lamps on. And that was just such a symbol of hope in that situation of light in the darkness. When the 50th anniversary of PWRDF came along a year later, we were asked to host a worship and fundraising banquet in Halifax. And people in our diocese really got engaged with that. I think we like to eat and have parties. And the people who had never done much for fundraising in terms of the Primates Fund suddenly were out looking for things for the food, looking for a caterer, looking for cases of wine. And I think Chris Farrow might know something about that. We met partners, we heard people, we heard their stories, and we heard what PWRDF meant to them in their country. And for the first time, some of the people in Nova Scotia could say, "I actually know what this thing does." In 2012, I was eligible for a sabbatical. And what I wanted to study was dance in worship because I had heard there were places where dancing was part of worship. And I had met the bishops from Tanzania at the Lambeth Conference, and Bishop Patrick from Masasi was one of those. And he said to me, I was telling him about my thing about dance, and he said, "Will you come and visit us? We dance." He said, you stand like this. He said, "But we dance." And for some reason, I was talking to Zaida, and she said, Masasi Diocese, we have partners there, do you know? So somehow I got a grant and I was able to go, but I got to dance, but I also got to spend time seeing Primates Fund projects. So I got to spend time with Bishop Patrick in places where there were goats. I got to meet one of the partners, Jeffrey. I had the opportunity to ask questions of partners there. I got to see women raising their children and their grandchildren and goats that had come through the gifts program. I got to see the smiles on the faces of women and young people at the wells where they did not have to travel a long way to get their water. And I got to see the oldest woman in the one community driving the tractor that PWRDF had helped to purchase. And what I heard in every place was thank you, thank you, thank you to PWRDF. So I add my thanks to PWRDF and thank you for listening.